Hey y'all, my name is Wyatt. I started my career in workforce development with the state of Kentucky in 2010. That experience ignited a deep passion for manufacturing within me. I started this show hoping to raise more awareness around the bright outlook manufacturing careers have. Join me as I sit down with some of the manufacturing industry's most successful changemakers and learn how they're partnering people with technology. It's time to give people more meaningful work. This is Workforce 4.0. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Workforce 4.0. I'm so excited to have Bryan Bauw with us here today. Bryan is the COO of Pico MES, and he is a fellow Alabamian. He lives over in Florence, so we are both in Northern Alabama. We don't live too far from each other, do we, Bryan?
I can just about see you.
Just
Hour and a half up the
about.
road. Yeah.
So that's exciting to have somebody local on the show and also somebody that's so involved in manufacturing. And I see you a lot at trade shows as well. But for those listening today, would you like to take a minute to introduce yourself in more length?
Yeah, I can do that. So professionally, I'm a recovering industrial engineer. I went to University of Michigan and did a couple industrial and operations engineering degrees. And then from there, jumped into the world of manufacturing on a rotational program, leadership rotational program at a British industrial conglomerate that moved me all over the place. So did some time in facilities and logistics and strategy. And I've lived on 3 continents and 4 countries or something silly like that over the course of that period, moving around, kind of figuring out what the different levers are that helped change and move manufacturing forward. And then spent some time in my early career, even as an engineer, on the contracts and customer side, which is a really interesting twist to an engineer's job because he kind of gives you the technical perspective to go into those contract negotiations. So really, it was
Mm.
actually quite advantageous. And then about 3, 4 years into my career, I told the CEO of that division I wanted to get out of the front end and get back on the shop floor. And he gave me the worst performing value stream in the whole company. His words, not mine. And we got down there and it was 50% on time, 50% quality, 100% cost overruns. It was good fun. So earned my manufacturing scars for the first year, helping turn that around with the help of a lot of people. You don't do that on your own. I can remember the first Friday, about a month into the job, one Friday night at about 11 p.m., sending pictures to my boss of our first big product leaving the door or leaving the shop finally after a couple months of trying to recover these very large aircraft parts. So lots of good experiences came out of that, and then spent next few years on the shop floor running more factory. Did a couple stints seconded to the government, helping small and medium manufacturers, and then did some M&A activities, and then rotated back into running uh, manufacturing plants for the next few years of my career. And then my corporate career ended when I joined up and doing the advanced manufacturing for a while and jumped off the corporate ladder looking to try and get into private equity and do some manufacturing there, and somehow stumbled way too far and landed into venture capital, which I knew very little about at that time. That would be about the time you and I met back then. So spent some time with a venture capital firm helping both invest into what we'd call hard tech or deep tech, things that had a physical presence in the world, and that could be biomanufacturing, energy storage. We even looked at a floating island company that's building floating islands.
Like in
And then
Dubai?
there's a number of different locales that they're trying to put these in. But yeah,
But
um,
is it similar to those or have you seen those? Do you know what I'm talking about?
more advanced than those. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
like
That's
these are
cool.
supposedly long-term self-sustaining islands and things like that. So, I mean, we looked at. I must have looked at some 1,500 deals a year of different companies doing various things in this kind of hard tech, deep tech space. So spent a lot of time both looking at the investment side and then also doing some advising along the way. And then a fellow investor reached out to asked if I wanted to do some advising for his portfolio, one of which was Pico. I got on the call with who would become my boss, Ryan, the CEO and co-founder of our company. Told him I hate MESs, but I was here to help. He laughed and he said he did too. That's why he started Pico. So when our 3 hour conversation turned into a couple 3 hour, our half an hour conversation turned into a couple 3 hour conversations, he pulled me out of my advising world and joined Pico about a year, almost a year and a half ago now, to help scale up the business. And so it's been a circuitous career. If you told me 5 years ago I would have ended up at a software company, I would have laughed at you pretty hard. But also, that's kind of the evolution of where manufacturing is going. Is there is a need for that bridge between the actual shop floor and the tech that will bring it into the 21st century. So that was what excited me and why I joined Pico. So here I
That's
am.
awesome. Well, I mean, I've known you, yeah, back in your venture capital days, I think is when we first met. I think the last time that I saw you was at Automate last year. And I think you had just recently joined Pico at that time. But when we're at these events and stuff like that, there's always some good parties, right? But one of these days,
Nerd parties. Let's go with that.
oh, it's a great time. It's a great time. Nerds are my favorite, is what I wanted to say. But
Absolutely. I love talking about the technology.
I'd like to get this party started with knowing what your favorite or your go-to karaoke song would be if we're at one of these parties.
So many songs, none of which should be ever sung by me because I am a horrible, horrible singer. But the one that I've been jamming to in my truck a lot, rightly, is the Avett Brothers, Ain't No Man. Really good, solid song. Very positive, uplifting kind of song. So been after that one a lot as of late.
Nice. That's a very good choice.
And I apologize if you're in a small cab of a truck with me and I put that on because I will belt it out.
I think we should do like the carpool karaoke. Workforce
Exactly.
4.0 carpool karaoke. That would be fun.
That'd be good fun.
It'd
Painful
be a
for
lot
some
of
people, but it'd be fun for us in the car.
fun. We wouldn't care. We would still have fun. So yeah, so it's been a real treat getting to know you through some of those events and also just kind of meeting up on LinkedIn is kind of where we first connected, and then we kind of realized that we were both in Northern Alabama, and it was right after COVID, I believe.
It was, yeah, it was.
Yeah. So just another testimony to the power of good networking.
100%. Yeah, it's been great kind of getting to know you and seeing some of the
Yeah.
things you've been helping move the manufacturing space forward.
Yeah, and I love that. Are you still teaching?
So I took this semester off, but I had been
Yeah.
spending some time teaching at University of North Alabama. Engineering economics was my previous class. Might pick something up again in this fall around engineering management.
See, I love that too, because that's really how we connected was that you
About
were
that,
doing
yeah.
the you were doing the day job thing and actually being an active member of the workforce in manufacturing. And then at night you were doing your college classes with UNA. And I thought that that was just really cool because that's if you're going to teach it, what better way to do that than, have that insider's perspective, right?
Absolutely. And most of my family have been in and around education at some point. And so it was kind of a natural progression for me to head back that direction and in some capacity. And it's great just to share nearly 20 years of career experience and how a lot of that actually applies to personal life too, particularly when talking economics and finance. And so helping just share a little bit of that knowledge that I've gleaned along the way. It's also fun to reflect back on how little you know when you're in college and the things you think that are going to be relevant and may not be relevant become extraordinarily relevant. Because I took the course I taught when I was in college, and it didn't really set because who thinks about engineering economics when they're in college and why that's relevant, and well, looking at the depreciation models for various large capital investments on the way past, or understanding what a cash flow sheet is or something along those lines. And then all of a sudden you get into the workforce, and particularly as an engineer, to understand how the business side of things works, even if you're not in the business side of things, helps you kind of adjust for why are people making the decisions that they're making, because decisions aren't made on a pure technical basis. They're not in my current company. They haven't been in any of the companies I've run in the past. Sometimes they are based on wider economic influences. Sometimes they're based on commercial justifications. Sometimes they're compromise, and understanding those kind of levers that come and go. It's really powerful. And it's the same in your, your personal life. If you're running a personal budget, understanding what some of those trade-offs need to be and why you make those decisions. Why do I save for the future? Those kind of things. Is it good to do a
Right.
401k? Yes, it is. Those kind of things as people move forward. So it's really fun to get in those conversations with young minds who haven't been seeing all the practicalities and flaws of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of shaping the future of our manufacturing workforce, which I think we both agree is something that, we've got to buckle down and do, right?
Absolutely. And we have to lean into where they are going too. And that's part of why I really like Pico and the company I'm at is a lot of my generation don't fully get why it's so important to digitize from the workforce perspective. But when we do trade shows and high school and college kids come past, they get it. It's almost a gamification level of manufacturing of like, why is this not standard? Plugging in all the tools. Effectively, it's a live action role playing game for them, where every piece of equipment in front of them is
It's a puzzle.
comes online as they're progressing through this series of events, which is just like a game, and processing it that way. And so being able to do that and to be able to do it with speed and be able to do it at an economic level that opens it up to all of manufacturing really was quite enticing. Part of why I joined Pico to do that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you touched on one of the biggest points that I want to have during this conversation today. But, I'm calling this episode The End of Documentation as We Know It. So that will be the name of this episode. We're making this happen. But why do you think that's important to our workforce, and how do you think that's influencing career decisions for the younger generations?
So if I take that last bit first, the digitization and modernization of manufacturing is almost a necessity now because it's attractive. I mean, if you look at a fast food joint, there are some fast food joints are more modernized than a lot of factory floors I've been on. Just as far as the interface with the worker goes. I mean, if you've ever stood behind a bar at a McDonald's or a Burger King, it's actually quite interesting how they've done it from an industrial engineer's point of view of how they've systematized the whole process and made it so you're optimizing and augmenting the human experience. And the younger generations are looking for that. They don't want to go back in where they're writing everything down where it feels very efficient. Why am I recording this? Why am I writing this down? Why am I chasing this piece of paper all over the shop floor? We used to do that when I was in the early teens. One of our factories, it took us 30, 45 days to get a product through. And at the end, the product would be ready, but we couldn't find the piece of paperwork that justified what we did, called the traveler. And we'd be chasing all over the factory trying to find this one piece of paper that comes. Nobody wants to do that. It's not fun. And it doesn't feel value added to anybody. When everybody walks around with one of these in their pockets these days, and understands how quickly they can get to information and how quickly they can engage with the wider world and the wider systems around them, why would you want to go on the shop floor and go back to a 1980s process of logging everything on a paper? I mean, I
I
understand
wouldn't.
why, and exactly, and I understand why companies still are there because there's been a lot of promise in the past that hasn't moved the needle forward, and some of these big monolithic systems that have come in to play in the past have been very expensive and b very frustrating to deploy because manufacturers
Mm.
aren't software experts. They're not industrial Internet of Things experts, and that gets very expensive very fast, and it's a very limited skill or limited number of people with that skill set. So where we've kind of come at is how do you commoditize and democratize all of that so that manufacturers can go back to being really good at being manufacturers, and they don't have to be experts in deploying advanced manufacturing techniques. They just can be experts in using advanced manufacturing. But like you and I with our phone, you don't have to code the app into your phone. You should be like, App Store, I want that app. Download. Here's a little training module on how to use it, and you're away and running. And that should be, in many instances, the directional path for a lot of manufacturers, particularly on the small and medium kind of size manufacturers. And that relates with this generation, just to circle it back to where your question was. If like they grew up on video games, a vast majority of them, they understand the world around them and the interactions with the digital. I mean,
Well, even we did though, right? I mean, I guarantee you
I was
some
old school.
Super
I had an
Mario.
Atari. I had the original Atari, and I had the original Nintendo NES system. Yes, I remember Duck Hunt was the greatest thing since sliced bread. So very at the
Duck Hunt.
early advent of technology there.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
a good one. No, I mean, my first video game that I played was on my brother's original Nintendo system, and it was the original Mario, and I love that game. I still
all
love
8
that game.
levels. Yeah.
All 8 levels. All 8 levels. I was so good at it though. Yeah, I mean, and then I think it was the 90s when we had the internet, right? So I remember being in 4th grade, I think, when we got the internet.
Putting the AOL disc in and the big crackling noise as the modem came online and
Oh
all that.
gosh.
As the internet became commoditized. Yeah, absolutely.
It's
So
a sound of nostalgia that I don't think that even the younger generations will ever understand. They'll never
nope.
understand that noise, what
And
that
to be fair,
noise
they shouldn't
means.
have to, because you're waiting 5 minutes for the internet to come online. We
Oh
can't.
my
It's like a
gosh.
couple microseconds now these days.
It was epic. Yeah. I mean, and sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes it wouldn't just sit there and keep dialing and dialing and dialing, and you're just like, "Come
Try
on."
another number. Try another number.
Uh-huh. Oh my gosh, epic. Those were the
Yeah, it was fun.
days.
It was
But
fun.
that's something that we had early on in our lives, and to your point, I don't think that your documentation has to be boring or your manufacturing process has to be boring, and I think it's really important to the future of our workforce that they also have access to that. But I'm curious to know if you've seen any, like, use cases specifically related to that, like
So we see
how
a
it's
number
impacting.
of different use case of how it kind of changes. The interesting one that's not in our company, but I mean, real simple. Back to your example of the '90s. Remember when Britannica went from books on a shelf to a CD to the internet of
Yes.
Wikipedia? It's
It's
all been around for
crazy.
20 years. Like, people are still looking through paper manuals to try and figure it out. The simple first step in a lot of this is just that: is how do you get from, instead of chasing around paper manuals and paper work instructions, to bringing them online. And some people make that jump of digitizing into putting it into a PowerPoint or putting it into a PDF. You haven't really changed the game. You've just made the way you're reading it different. Where it's really useful is there's lots of good resources out there of like actually digitizing it, so the work instruction starts interacting back with the worker, as opposed to the worker advancing it by either touching a screen or clicking a mouse or something along those lines. So then you add the next layer of like, I'm holding a torque gun, or I'm holding a scanner, or I'm holding a sealant gun, or something along those lines. Why is that device not talking back to my work instruction? It should
Mhm.
know, once I've enacted that action, I've done it correctly, the work instruction should advance. It's not hard technology. It's just, how do you do that? And in a world, in a few recent days gone by, it would take a manufacturing engineer to go code in each one of those devices. Why? I mean, why does every factory code in that device when they're doing the exact same thing? So instead, where a number of companies, including Pico, who just announced that we've got 2,500 devices connected through our library, of all of a sudden it's a plug and play. It's just like that duck hunt game I was talking about. Oh, like I just plugged the gun in and knew it was going to shoot the screen. That should be the same thing on a shop floor. I'm going to plug in this torque gun, tell it I want to drive it to 2 Newton meters, and it's going to drive to 2 Newton meters every time I got to drive to 2 Newton meters. It's as simple as that. And I make it sound very simple, but it actually has become that simple.
Yeah. I mean, and it should be, right? We shouldn't be wasting our time as humans running around and trying to track everything down when we could have that technology, we could leverage that technology, and then we can be doing other things in place of that time lost.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you mentioned automate earlier, and that automate's got some really exciting technology around robotics and various other autonomous systems. But a lot of those systems are point solutions, and so they require a lot of installation activities. Where actually, if you can create a robust, highly flexible system around the human experience and bring them and make them as efficient as possible and engaged as possible, all of a sudden you've created a very highly flexible 95% autonomous cell. And you kind of do away with some of this drive to create what people want to call automation, which is robotics in many ways. And you actually automate all the systems around a human. So like I said, that communication level between whatever's in the human's hand, just automate that. There's days gone by, you taking torque gun, you like drive it to 2 Newton meters, and then someone set the torque gun down, go pick up a pen and write it down, or they log into a system and click and say they've driven it. Like, why is that not communicating automatically back to say the work was done correctly? Move on to
Like
the next step.
like we've checked this box.
Yep.
Yeah, we've completed that task. So that's yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that there's kind of a difference in automation and robotics. And I kind of want to explore that a little bit more with you because you have started doing a lot of speaking events, right? You were just at MXO
Yeah.
Southwest,
Yep.
Southeast.
I think they're running another one up in Ohio in September. Great event, by the way, if anybody sees this and wants to go experience what digital transformation and should look like across many different environments. Just great,
That's a
great event.
That's a good one, and we both know Lucy, and she's amazing. She's just really good
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just really well organized event, and it's because she's really well organized.
She's girl boss goals. She gets it done. But yeah, one of the topics that you speak a lot on is the difference in AI and the difference in industrial automation and the difference in robotics. And I don't think, of course, they're all a little interconnected, right? And I
They
think that
have
it's easy
it's not
to,
the Venn diagram's not mutually exclusive in any of those. No.
yeah. And I think that it's easy to relate robotics with industrial automation. Like from a macro scale, you see those two things and you're like, yeah, I mean, they could be the same thing, but we both know they're not, right? But AI is interesting. Where do you think that's kind of coming into play in manufacturing, and how would you define each of these things separately?
So if I take AI, it's funny you mentioned MXO. Jeff Winter and I were sitting there having a really long chat about where AI is relevant to manufacturing, where it's not. He was tossed out this quote that 80 odd percent of manufacturers are using AI. And I challenged the thought. And then he did walk me back to there are a lot of folks using Copilot for very simple tasks through Microsoft. Help me write this document, help me create this form. So a lot of the early adoption of AI, even at some of the more advanced manufacturers, is in the front office where there's a lot of computer work to be done, a lot of processing, order management, things like that to help look through that. It's kind of the next level. Where AI isn't in a lot of manufacturers is where when you hear manufacturing AI, you kind of jump to the bridge of is it on the shop floor? And while manufacturing generates a multitude more data than just about any other industry in the US, most of that data is locked away in PLCs or in paperwork or in other things and isn't connected to a system that an AI could actually use. So when you think about core AI functionality on a shop floor, we're a long way from that as a entire industry because there's no good data for the AI to do it. You can get into some predictive data where they'll create their own models, but again,
Mhm.
you have to make sure you're not building in bias on that end, et cetera, et cetera. Where I think is more interesting and come back to a little bit of the Pico thesis is how do you create systems that create usable data first and foremost? And then how do you get that across A, your shop floor, and B, your supply chain? Because the other thing is people want to talk about AI and supply chain, and the AI is very relevant to the logistics end of supply chain, where a lot of
Mm-hmm.
companies don't know is, am I getting good quality product in my supply chain because their sub tiers aren't connected to whatever value chain that is to say, I hit all my key characteristics, my end of line tester ran correctly. Again, very manual type data collection systems and that thing. And so it's going to struggle a little bit on the AI of if you have a problem, how do I root cause that? Which is where AI is really powerful. So I reckon you got a decade or more before AI as a core principle to manufacturing shop floors really takes off.
So, from your perspective, when you're thinking about the future implementation of AI in manufacturing, what do you think day to day that looks like for the frontline workforce? Like, how do you see that playing out as far as affecting like jobs or affecting the way that we work or what capabilities that maybe the AI, becomes?
There's some really interesting use cases out there that help the layer one out from manufacturing come to mind. So, like maintenance, looking through maintenance manuals, trying to solve problems. PTC, a couple other companies have scanning devices where you show it different parts of a machine and it can help you register which manual you need to be and help you start root causing where the problem might be occurring. So instead of flipping through the 1,000-page manual on how to run your CNC machine, it guides you into that space. And that's a really interesting use case along the lines of what Microsoft's Copilot is like it augments the human, it doesn't displace the human. So it takes you in, and then you still need the kind of human interpretation at the front to lock that in. I think eventually we might get to where some of that is even replaced, but that's going to take a lot more repetition to actually lock that in. And I've seen interesting use cases where people are using it to create work instructions. Squint is a startup that we run across quite frequently. They're using some interesting interfaces to help people simplify their work instruction creation, which is then passed to an operator to follow. That's kind of in its nascent growth. So there are some, like I said, bolt-on capabilities that AI is really helping move the needle forward on. And I reckon there'll be some exciting things over the next few years is this to that. But again, the core of like, am I manufacturing correctly? AI is a little ways out on that still.
Gotcha. Interesting. At
But
AI, it's a hot topic right now.
it
I
is
think
all the
people are
buzz.
it's all the buzz. All the trend right now is the AI, but, in the meantime, we do have industrial robotics and we do have industrial automation, right? And they are both of these sectors are making waves, I think, in manufacturing. You're starting to see a lot more plans to utilize industrial automation in ways to solve maybe like labor challenges or just for the connectivity of trying to get increased data value add out of their machines. You're seeing robotics being implemented for kind of the same thing, or maybe to replace more dangerous jobs that maybe are not suitable for people. What are your thoughts on, how those two things are different and where you see the biggest value add for implementing industrial automation and robotics?
I think a lot of that, it's the same thing for me, similar to AI, is they're all tools in a toolkit. So you come back to the economics discussion we had about what we teach the over there at UNA of what's the return on the investment. So the further you get into
Mhm.
robotics, you got a very large landed cost. In some instances, if you go bigger, there's lots of good companies starting to simplify robotics and kind of move into the cobot space, which are great for machine tending, moving parts in and out of machines. But still, you still have lots of training time to bring those online. So a lot of those use cases are part of a system and part of a wider picture. And I say the same thing about AI to bring them all together. It's the same thing. A lot of people thought additive manufacturing was going to revolutionize manufacturing a decade ago. It was going to change how everything was manufactured. We're just going to print everything like you see in Star Trek, and orders up a coffee and it just appears. That kind of level of excitement about it.
Have you seen that show Upload on Amazon Prime?
I have, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a fun one. Exactly. Yeah,
Print the steak.
exactly. Yeah, don't miss. That whole kind of ethos. So industrial automation, robotics, AMVs, the autonomous moving vehicles for logistics, they're all pieces of a picture that you need to plan both on the kind of micro level and the macro level for how you're going to run your factory. And in my opinion, the best deployments are the ones that kind of understand how those systems interlink as a platform for your whole environment. So there's some really cool uses of robotics, particularly when you're doing high speed repetitive work, moving part A to part B and just keep chunking the same thing. Or if you're trying to replace something that's ergonomically unsound, you can bring a robot in to effectively do that, like repetitive arm movements for hammering things in or pushing things in where there's a lot of pressure needed. Robots are really good in that space as part of the system. And particularly I spent most of my career on the discrete manufacturing side. So things are getting assembled, things are getting machined, large components coming together as opposed to the continuous batch or continuous process.
Right.
You get onto that side of manufacturing where like you're making paper or you're rolling out aluminum or you're making pharmaceuticals where things are going past at an extraordinary rate. I mean, that's even better justification why automation has lived there longer than it really has on the other side of that. ROI is actually a lot quicker because you're doing so much more with those devices. So yeah. The other thing out though that kind of I think all that is look for don't over engineer the process in a lot of ways. So I was having a good discussion with a couple folks a week and a half ago at an event at a manufacturing leadership council event. And our debate is, do you optimize for the entire system or do you optimize at the sub nodes? And then you kind of take the inefficiencies as those nodes try and talk to each other. I think that's a really powerful conversation because depending on the scale of your business and depending on the scale of your factory, if you're a multinational with quarter million people working for you, you're going to want to optimize at the top level in most instances because that's where your return on investment is going to be most relevant. But if you're a 500 person factory up the road and that's all you do, you can start looking at those sub nodes because the full system isn't going to give you as good of an ROI as if you're optimizing and digitizing those sub nodes.
So it's really funny that you just brought that up because in the back of my mind, when I'm thinking, like you were talking about the robotics and implementing robotics and the solutions and all that, in the back of my mind, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, but how hard is this going to be for me to integrate with everything else? Like, how do I get all of the things to talk to each other? Right. I feel like that in business as a business owner is one of the biggest challenges, whether you're running a manufacturing shop or whether, we're running a recruiting agency, right? So, how do you get all of the things to integrate and talk to each other? And I feel like you just really hit on that point, not over engineer it and make that decision on where you want to integrate on the nodes is interesting.
We have that conversation a lot inside Pico because one of our leading features is connecting to everything in and around the worker and making it as simple for the QE to engage with that person through those devices. And there are legacy devices that are very hard to integrate, but that's just where they were at in technology wise. And then there's some more modern devices that are more difficult to connect with because some folks, manufacturing companies have taken the more Apple model where they want a closed system. So again,
Uh-huh.
you're optimizing for everything. If you can bring it in from your system, that's a pretty optimized thing. If you're an Apple fan like I am, all the Apple stuff just tends to talk to each other. Yeah, exactly. Which is great because I'm optimizing for my self environment. But if you start trying to go then link Apple out to other things, you end up running
Like
into
Microsoft.
I was going to say Excel, but yeah, Microsoft.
Excel,
You end up
yeah.
running into that adventure. It's gotten better in recent years, but if you used to try and load up a PowerPoint on a Microsoft device 10, 15 years ago, good luck. Like there was like very few fonts. It was a whole nightmare kind of thing. And it used to really disrupt my college mates when I would open up a PowerPoint on a Microsoft and they would try and go format something after I sent it
Well,
to them.
yeah, or I remember when I first got my MacBook and I was so excited and I downloaded the Microsoft Office suites. I mean, this was in 2015. I mean, we had it all, online, just went online, downloaded the software and all that. And I remember trying to convert like Word documents to pages or like write in pages and then convert to Word. And that was like, I mean, there are fonts that exist in the Mac that do not exist in Microsoft. And like I was like 30 years old running it, starting a business. That was something that you don't think about when you're like, yeah, I'm going to start a business. You know what I mean?
And and again, just to bring that back to manufacturing, there's lots of people that are advocating for unified namespaces, for unified data structures to simplify a lot of that. And there's a lot of good reason for that standardization. And that's how standardization groups come along. And so, big advocate for the right level of standardization because, in my experience, particularly in manufacturing, there's a balance between standardization and flexibility. So,
Mm,
at some point, you still have to be able to let people try things and work a little bit on the fringe of the system to see if there is a better way. Because if you get too forced into the bureaucratic layer of you can only do these things into eternity, the danger is that's going to take you down the wrong road, and then good luck getting back across to where you actually need to go. So kind of balancing that structure with the flexibility to kind of challenge the systems along the way. And the other
ye-
benefit that's actually sitting on the third side of that now in the last few years is a lot of that technology is at a price point that isn't going to break the bank to actually try and play with. It
mm.
used to cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to do 3D printing or to do advanced robotics and some of the more advanced CNC stuff. And there's instances where a lot of that is becoming a lot more commoditized, or even the software packages that enabled Pico for them.
Phoenix has a 3D printer now, and he prints me things on his little
I love
3D
it.
printer with his little app on his iPad. So it's really cool, right? But yeah, no, what I was going to say is standardization, the death of innovation. And I think that's really interesting, your takeaway on, letting folks work on that fringe. How do you
I
define
would.
that fringe as a leader?
It's different for every space I've been in, and so you got to watch it and you got to manage it. In fact, I was talking to a colleague about a similar thing earlier. Of it's not black and white. You have to kind of frame it as semi black and white, but it's not black and white. You got to have somebody that's doing the inefficient process of trying to understand, are we working the system? Are we not? It runs in line with the same thing I learned early on in as an industrial engineer of we have our cognitive ability and we have our subconscious ability. And that's why I like systems like Pico is our systems really help bring forward the cognitive ability. So the actual human engagement part of the system, if you can standardize the processes that are very repetitive, that are very, you don't want to use a lot of brain power to try and go do the same thing again and again, sticking a nut in the same 10 holes over and over again isn't something that you want to spend a lot of cognitive, and often why people miss them because they aren't spending a lot of time cognitive. So if you can create a system that enables those base level activities, you're actually giving yourself the opportunity to then go forward in a very robust way with they're now using their cognitive ability to challenge the process to find the next layer of continuous improvement, to find where the quality issues are happening, to do some root causing, any number of things that can come off the back of that. And that's why I like the two of those, and I like the interplay between those very much. And it's been a key feature of a lot of my career is like trying to pay attention to like where can we just keep that standardization, and then where do we want to flex the creativity to kind of override that or help end around that.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful advice. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
As someone that is very curious for their own reasons on how we drive that innovation within the boundaries, right? Within the standard. standards and standardization process. So I
Yeah,
appreciate that. Well, we have time, I think, for one more question here before we close out, if you have capacity for it.
I do.
Yeah. So I guess, for those in the audience that are listening that want to learn a little bit more about Bryan the person and what your own career journey was like and how you ended up as a COO of a company. I know we touched a little bit on that earlier, but from your perspective, what was something about the manufacturing industry that you didn't expect to encounter when you started your career that you realize now was something that was surprising to you?
The opportunity to do so much off the back of an engineering degree was something that's why at the beginning I kind of jokingly call myself a recovering engineer. Like I did the degrees fully expecting to go out into the world and be an industrial engineer in many ways and then I don't know that I've ever been officially an engineer in any capacity. The closest I got was when I was doing advanced manufacturing deployments for a year at Collins Aerospace. But like, that was as a true engineer, that was the closest I ever got it. But I've also never set down what I learned as an engineer because that systems thinking, that process thinking is fundamental. It's whether I've been running a site and had to look at the finances, whether it's been out on the shop floor and you're looking at safety issues and understanding some of the mechanics behind them, whether it's been in the front office, on the customer side, trying to negotiate commercials, you still have to understand some of the systems that go along with it on the sales side. So my old boss used to say, kind of get yourself a couple, three pillars and use those as the foundation for how you do everything, and you'll be sound instead of trying to not have any of that foundation. Again, coming back to what you're saying about your cognitive versus your coming back to what needs to standardize versus what you need to be creative with. Early in your career, getting a couple core principles and spending a lot of time really getting good at understanding those. One of those was for me was continuous improvement. One of those for me was understanding around contracts, that kind of stuff. And then it gives you lenses in which to frame things through as you move away from those cores. And it also gives you the ability to ask questions in a relevant way as your team grows around you too. So for me, it was that don't try and put yourself into a box just because you've got one set of learnings at some point. There's so much you can kind of evolve and do. Like I said, if you told me I was going to go into software 5 years ago, pretty much would have laughed at you. But I also didn't know what venture capital was in that 5 years, and that was another space you kind of tripped into. So there's just a world of opportunities if you want to kind of go out there and challenge yourself too.
I love that, and I think that we overlook that a lot in manufacturing.
We do, and I loved. So again, coming all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, when I'm having chats with some of the students and things like that, of like, what can engineers do? I'm like, engineering degree puts a foundation down for just about anything, really. I got friends that are in technical sales that are making a killing and they're using their
Uh-huh.
engineering degree. I've got friends that are in politics using their engineering degree. I got, engineering degrees give you a really good foundation for thinking if you look at it at the core. And so don't dismiss opportunities because it doesn't necessarily fall into it needs to be an engineering bucket.
I love that. That's powerful. It really is because I think we get stuck in those buckets, right? We get stuck in those buckets, I know, in recruiting, in HR. And when we're talking about hiring somebody or when we're talking about we've got this opening, this is what we want and it has to be this. Does it? You know? So I love that. I love that advice. There's many of us out there that no, it did not have to be that, right?
No. Yeah.
So, so yeah, I love that so much, Bryan. I appreciate your time today. I appreciate you coming
Likewise.
on Workforce 4.0. I'm so happy that you reached out and asked me to be on the show today. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with in parting before we close out?
I really appreciate you having me on here. Hiring and HR and recruiting and people management is a big passion of mine, particularly helping expand the next generation of workers. So I love what you're doing here, helping share and spread the message that there's lots of opportunities out there. And so I appreciate you let me participate in a little way today.
Aw, of course. And I will see you shortly, I'm sure. We'll
Yeah,
we'll probably catch up at
trade
a
show
show.
season is upon us.
Yes. Yes, it is. All
100%.
right. Well, thank you, Bryan. I appreciate it. And for everyone listening in today, thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you again here soon on the next episode of Workforce 4.0.
Very much.